So let's do this thing. Today we are going to be learning about first the parts of a plant and then how plants reproduce. So we're going to start with the general parts of every plant. So generally, plants have roots, stems, and leaves. We're going to start with the roots. They are what keep plants in the ground. They absorb water and minerals from the soil, and sometimes roots store food, like potatoes or carrots. So, there are two main types of root systems. You can have fibrous roots, which is exactly what it sounds like. They kind of eke out in tiny little fibers all along the top of the soil, or a taproot, which goes straight down into the ground. It's one big root. A typical root has a rounded tip covered by a protective cap called a root cap. You can see it down at the bottom of the illustration, and it has little root hairs that absorb water and things. Xylem and phloem, those, what do we call them? They're transport tissues. We call them, well, the transport tissues, xylem and phloem from yesterday. They're in the center of the root, and they help move the water and food that the roots pull in up into the stem. The stem carries the things from the roots to the leaves. The stem is a big transportation system. Think about it like a highway. It also provides support and holds the leaves up closer to the sun so they can get more energy. Stems are either herbaceous, green and soft, that's what herbaceous means, or woody, like a tree made of wood. In a woody stem, the cambium, which is the living center of the tree, produces new xylem and phloem every year because the old xylem and phloem dies. This is what makes the tree rings. I talked a little bit about this yesterday. Leaves, all the way up at the top, capture the sun's energy and carry out photosynthesis. They have small holes in the bottom called stomata that can open and close, letting gas in and out of the plant and water in and out of the plant as water vapor. This is a process called transpiration. Too far. Oh well. Inside a seed. Oh, sorry. Moving on. Right, we're going to talk about how seeds turn into plants. Inside a seed, there is a partially developed plant, like a plant embryo almost. If a seed lands somewhere where conditions are favorable, that seed begins to grow. Seeds generally have mechanisms to move them far away, so you don't just have a bunch of plants growing on top of each other. The seed will sprout, turn into a brand new little baby plant, and take root. So, seeds have three main parts: an embryo, some stored food to get them started in growing, and a seed coat to protect it. The embryo is a young plant that develops from a zygote or a fertilized egg. It uses the stored food until it can begin to photosynthesize and make its own, and the seed coat keeps the embryo and the food from drying out. Seeds move along by water can move them, like rain or a river. Wind can blow them. Humans can knock them, carry them, eat them, and move them around. And humans can do it too. Germination is when the embryo begins to grow and starts to poke out of the seed. This is when the little green sprout shoots out. It generally begins when the seed absorbs water. Said that word funny, water. Flowers are essentially the reproductive structures. These are the boy and girl parts, but plants aren't boys and girls like that. Each is both, generally. A typical flower contains sepals, petals, stamens, and pistils, and you will see the diagram up on the screen. Leaf-like sepals, the big petals, the leaf-like sepals are the green underpetals that protect the flower while it is developing. Petals are the large colorful parts that blossom open and you see, and that's what you think of when you think of flowers. They also are generally brightly colored, and they have a smell to help attract pollinating insects or birds, whatever it may be, to come to the flower and spread the pollen. Stamens, the little stalks and sticks that stick up, are the male parts. They have anthers and filaments. Anthers are the bits at the top. Filaments are the long stringy parts that hold the anther up. This produces the pollen we talked about. That was plant sperm yesterday. Pistils, the central part, the bigger part, are generally the female reproductive parts. Stigma, style, and ovary make up the pistil. Contain one or more ovules and protects the seeds as they develop. Pollination is a transfer of pollen from the male reproductive structure, the stamen, to the female reproductive structure, which is the pistil. And sometimes this happens internally within one plant. Sometimes this happens across two separate plants, depending on how it actually happens. So, now that we've talked about the reproductive structures, let's... my dog again. Let's talk about plant reproduction. Plants have two stages in their life cycle. They are sporophytes and gametophytes. Sporophytes is when the plant is producing tiny spores or seeds that can grow into new plants. The spore develops in the plant's other stage and becomes the gametophyte. Alright, so sporophyte, you can have spores. That's simple. Gametophyte, the plant has the male and the female reproductive parts, like the flower. There are the egg cells and the sex cells for fertilization. So in the sporophyte stage, you will get plants that can only produce plants that are genetically identical. In the gametophyte stage, you get plants that can produce plants with different genes by mixing their genes with someone else. Okay. Angiosperms, trees like you see here, are classified according to the length of that cycle. Annuals complete a life cycle within one growing season. Right? Biennials complete it within 2 years and do not flower until the second year. Perennials live more than 2 years. If you ever go shopping, perennials, if you buy a perennial flower, it will come back every year. Annuals grow and die in a single year, and if they are not successful in generating seeds that you will be able to use, they won't grow back again next year. So how do plants reproduce? Well, plants undergo sexual reproduction that needs fertilization. The pollen needs to make it to the egg somehow. So how does this happen? Well, we'll start with the process, apparently. Fertilization is the process in which sperm unites with an egg cell, makes a fertilized egg called a zygote. Because they release spores non-vascular and seedless plants need a moist environment for fertilization to take place, but seed plants do not. So, gymnosperms form these cones. These are pine trees. Reproduction involves cones. Most gymnosperms produce both male and female cones. Male cones produce pollen grains that contain cells that will mature into sperm cells. Female cones have ovules that produce egg structures. An ovule will develop into a seed if it gets fertilized by a male cone. Reproduction continues with pollination, fertilization. The seed develops and needs to disperse. We kind of touched on all those things. We'll talk about them more later. I think you even have an idea about those things, but we'll talk about them more later. In angiosperms, remember flowering plants, the reproductive structure is a flower. The process is the same. The sperm develops in the stamen, the egg cells develop in the pistil, pollination occurs, that pollination leads to fertilization, the seeds develop, and then they disperse to grow. The ovule will develop into a seed, and sometimes the ovary will develop into a fruit. Alright, because fruit is seeds and their food. Many plants can also undergo asexual reproduction, which involves only one parent and the offspring are genetically identical. New plants can grow from roots, from leaves, from stems. Bananas are done this way. They cut a limb off a banana and it asexually reproduces into two plants. That's why all bananas are identical. I've been over that like 4 times now, but I think it's really cool. So that is how plants reproduce. We will go over this and there are questions, but for now, that's it.